Welcome back to BaldHeaded Metal, guys, and welcome back to another podcast of Metal Chit Chat with Andrew McKay Smith from Scars and Guitars podcast. By the way, guys, go check it out. Really fun interviews. And today we have an interesting topic. I pitched this idea to Andrew saying, how about we talk about commercialization in metal and kind of our opinions on it? Because I feel like it's one of those topics, especially for metalheads. It can be a diehard issue. It could be something they just completely don't care about. I don't think anybody is completely indifferent to this topic. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And it's something that I've felt quite passionate about throughout my life, particularly as a younger fella, wanting to see bands stay in the underground. It's my band.
Yeah.
And in other instances, I've been quite happy to see bands graduate from maybe not the underground, but at a subterranean level to a point where back in the day, you could go into the Sanities and the HMVs and the big box retailers, not that they're around anymore, but the big box music retailers that used to be around. These days, it's a far flatter environment. If you want to get in the deepest, darkest, most satanic black metal outfit, they're on Bandcamp. And so too, I imagine, I mean, I haven't checked, but Adele's probably on Bandcamp as well. The point is, no matter what music you're into in 2021, you can easily find it. It's all accessible. It's just a matter of how much time, energy, and dedication you want to put into diving into aspects of the music that you love. But we're here to talk about heavy metal, aren't we? And the commercialization of heavy metal. So I think, gosh, I'm going to start real broad with you on this point, mate. And I'm going to say, overall, I think it's quite a good thing when
it's a good thing.
Bands, yeah, I think when bands find a way, no matter how inaccessible their music might be,
you don't feel like it destroys the music in some way, or it makes it too poppy, or just like the others, like some of the arguments you hear from fans.
Oh yeah, there's definitely an element of that, no doubt. Like the last thing you want to see is your favorite underground death or black metal band turn into a rock band, which has happened. And a lot of I think if bands do it for the sole purpose of trying to attract an audience, the fans smell a rat straight away.
Okay. You think you can tell, though, as fans, when something's done genuinely or it's been somehow influenced? Like you can tell, for example, we know Limp Bizkit. That was a commercial music through and through, new metal. We know that. Yeah. But let's say somebody like Ginger. You know, I'll make an argument. I'll tell you what I feel about that. I want to hear kind of what you're going to say about it. Then I'll tell you what I think about Ginger myself.
Oh, Ginger. Okay, Tatiana is one of the most charismatic front women of all time, of any genre ever. Mm-hmm. That woman is a rolled gold superstar. Okay, she is just stunning as well, Tatiana. And the fact that those musicians behind her can play just about any style of music presented to them, or if they so chose to, they could go and they could take that band in almost any direction. I think I seriously hope Tatiana and the lads in Ginger, they best Adele at the top of the charts and playing the type of music that they're playing at the moment. And at this point in time, I don't think it's unrealistic to think they're not going to be anywhere near Adele. I get that, but they're certainly at a point where it's not unrealistic that they couldn't crack the top 10 in the United States in terms of album sales on the Billboard charts, the mainstream charts, not the Heat Seeker, not the metal or rock chart or whatever it is, but the main one. They could definitely do that because you've got someone out the front of that group that can appeal to people. And here's the key point: that don't listen to heavy metal.
I can see what you said there, especially with their later albums. I've discovered them through this channel and kind of got into them, started listening to them. And I'll tell you, I said this on one of the reactions and I got a very visceral response from fans when I called them commercial. And of course, the association with any metalhead, commercial means bad. It means it's poppy, it's made for the radio friendly, it's made to make money, all these kinds of things that they associate with, where I think being for the radio and making money, any band wants to do that. I believe so. And I do believe there's a good commercialization and there's bad commercialization. Because with Ginger, they were in this metalcore thing in the beginning, which was kind of like everybody else. Yes, they were maybe above the rest and they were doing it really well, but they were kind of generally what everybody was doing. That was the in thing within the heavy metal genre to do. And then they did this other thing with this kind of a death metal slash metalcore slash different kinds of elements that they've combined now into their music. And I think they've become commercial because of that sound. They've kind of exploded and gained so much traction and eyes on them, and people are paying attention to them for creating what is now, I believe, as well as I didn't in the beginning, a unique sound that's not generally heard. But it also gained them so much popularity that I think it's fair to say they are a commercial band within the metal genre. There's not a lot of bands, especially in the last 10 years, who can say they have that much traction as Ginger has.
I think, yeah, you've done a good job there at, I think, explaining what your perspective on commercial music means. So you still kept it within the fairly limited boundaries of what heavy metal, or you call it metalcore, call it death metal, or what have you. It's not like here's the issue I had when I was growing up. What's that bloody song off the Black album that blew up and was Metallica's Black album? Nothing Else Matters.
Nothing Else Matters. Nothing Else Matters. Whatever may roam. Yeah.
Well, Nothing Else Matters to me was the obligatory power ballad, but it went so far into the mainstream consciousness because 3/4 of the song has nothing to do with heavy metal or hard rock. And that was a calculated attempt by Bob Rock and Metallica to branch out into FM radio territory. And it worked.
It worked 100%, yeah.
Unfortunately, every man and his dog plying a trade in musical genres related to what Metallica were doing at the time. You knew if you bought an album, like Megadeth then had Tout le Monde, and you knew that it was coming. You could tell that here was the radio song. It wasn't even the ballad. Here was the radio song on the album. There were tons of bands that did that after that, and it got really annoying, to be honest with you, because you'd skip track 3 or track 4 because it usually was there as well. It was usually in the first sort of third, at the end of the first third of an album.
Capture your attention a little bit.
Yeah, and like even Megadeth went so far into that territory. They did an entire album that was based on the radio rock sound in Risk in 1999, which is probably the most diabolical so-called metal album of all time by a major artist, an artist that did have a big audience at the time. And I remember feeling...
Wouldn't you say that Risk, though, is still a good... Like, for example, not Risk, sorry, like Cryptic Writings is a 100% commercial album, in my opinion. But I thought if a different band, even Risk, if a different band released that album that wasn't Megadeth, it probably would have been received way better than knowing that Megadeth released that album. You know what I mean? Like if some new band started with Black Album and that was their first album, probably some people just absolutely like blow their mind. But knowing Metallica made that album, I was like, what? And that's where kind of the discrepancy kind of started.
Yeah, I don't know what Dave Mustaine's issue was with trying to get played on radio all the time. His band's name is Megadeth, for God's sakes. It's not going to happen in the level that he wants it to happen. At least when I spoke to the guys in Helloween, you know, Marcus, the bass player, is saying, well, we might have got a bit more radio play if we didn't have the name Helloween. But I mean, they are the band that they are. And he said, I think he eventually said he wouldn't change a thing anyway. It was just a point that he raised about their more commercial sound. Helloween's more so-called commercial sound, accessible. Sorry, that's the word I'm going to use. Accessible sound. But back to Megadeth, yeah. Look, I'm in a unique position, I suppose. You know, I remember looking forward to Cryptic Writings, its release, and then when it came out, I got it the second or third day I could, and I listened to it non-stop for months on end. I absolutely adored that album. I still do, I must say, but I listened to it to death, so I don't need to listen to it anymore. It's just one of those records. But that was the balance for Dave Mustaine between that accessible sound that I think he thought that he could, that he had within him, but they didn't. The key point with that album is it still sounded like a Megadeth album, given it made sense, the journey they'd been on to that date. Okay,
that makes sense. So, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they took it right to the line. There were some songs like, is it I'll Get Even With You? That
She-Wolf was great. She-Wolf was such a good song.
One of their best songs ever, and it's right at the end, isn't it? I think, and Triple F Fight for Freedom is right on the end of that as well. I mean, they're heavy fucking songs, man, and they're fast, and I just think he got the balance right with Risk. I think he was goaded in the media by something Lars said to him in a Guitar World magazine or something like that, where Lars said, I think Dave Mustaine needs to take more risk. And I don't know why he'd be goaded by something that Lars would say in a magazine interview of all things. It's not like as if he picked up the phone and said to Dave, hey, I think you need to take more risks. You know, it wasn't directed at him. It was a conversation, an interview that probably responding to one of 1,000 questions that he'd answered in that month alone, Lars. And it was probably an off-the-cuff statement he probably doesn't even remember saying, but I distinctly remember Dave responding to that and saying that risk was a response in a way to that statement that Lars had put out there. And it's his single only recording failure, I think. But it was a warning to bands that if you're going to change your sound that much in an attempt to be played on the radio and to capture the mainstream rock the attention of mainstream rock fans, that you will alienate your core fan base. That's the key. You can go commercial, if that's the word, or become more accessible, but do not alienate your core fans. That's my view on it.
I'll say, like, kind of take it a little bit to the beginning, and I'll say that as a kid, I probably had the same viewpoint as you, where I felt like if in any kind of way a band is earning money, they have betrayed my loyalty. The extremism of a young person, you know? But once you, like you said, I 100% agree with you. When you get to a certain age, that falls to the side. Because first of all, you understand all these people have lives, A. And secondly, every band wants to make it on a commercial level. They'll be lying if they said no. But I've started compartmentalizing it a little bit, where metal is not as commercial as rock or hip hop, techno, all these other genres, and it never will be. It's just too extreme on one side. That's the kind of how I always felt about it. Yep. But with metal, within it, there is commercialization. And for example, I think I made the example to you last time, I believe, where I gave the example of Cradle of Filth and Demo Burger. They kind of do the same thing, this orchestral black metal sound. But to me, the elements, the way they combine the whole over-the-top gothic look with this kind of almost feminine J-rock, J-pop kind of look that they had from Cradle of Filth, and making it very accessible, like to the point where, like, this is, I don't know, it was, to me, it was the example of commercialization that I don't like. And then you look at Demo Burger, they are commercialization, something I do like, because it made black metal a little softer, a little bit more melodic, a little bit more riffy and chuggy. It was a little easier to listen to, especially if you compare it to something like Emperor, which is not less easy to listen to. And I would argue most people probably took multiple times to even get into them.
No, agreed. Yeah. The only point of difference I have is I'm an old school Cradle of Filth fan, meaning that I got into them around Dusk and Her Embrace. And so I remember the impact that they had, and they did draw a lot of new black metal fans into the genre. There's no doubt. And I remember the hatred that a lot of the so-called, they weren't the other bands, by the way. I don't think the other bands could give a shit, but some of the fans around, I remember listening to, there's a radio station here in Australia called Triple J, and there were some people who were interviewed, and it was one night where they were talking about some of the changes in the metal scene, and they were at a gig, and some bloke was commenting on, look at all the kids that are here with dyed black hair and Cradle of Filth t-shirts. And I'm thinking, shit, I'm one of them. and I was only about 18 at the time or thereabouts. But I mean, that if you showed that, I mean, I was living with my parents at the time. I was still living at home, and I'd put that music on in the background, and they'd pop their head into my bedroom and look at me like as if I was worshipping the devil or something. This was still music that was extremely jarring to the average person on the street, the person who isn't into heavy metal. And I would even say I understand the criticism of Cradle of Filth, because I stopped listening to them after Midian. I didn't like that album at all and onwards. But they did. I understand your point. As soon as they had Martin Powell in the band and those high-end keyboards started to come in, they sounded a bit like I don't know. It lost its nastiness for me. It lost that vampire flavor that they had throughout the 90s. But yeah, Demon Borgir were an interesting one, because they kind of started out heavier and a bit more inaccessible, and then they got very quickly became accessible. And I couldn't stand it, to be honest with you. I didn't understand what the hell was going on, because it just sounded like they layered keyboards on just riff metal stuff, and they'd layered the keyboards on it, and it sort of didn't make a lot of sense. And It's only recently, actually, and it was by accident that I started, I wouldn't say getting into Dimmu Borgir, but I could actually understand where they were coming from musically speaking. They were playing in the background and I was thinking, who's that? And it turned out it was a playlist on Spotify, Dimmu Borgir playlist on Spotify that went on in the background. So yeah, mate, it's a topic. Actually, I'm going to take it in a bit of a different direction because I did do some preparation. Okay.
Okay.
What I wanted to do was to share with people. Okay, so rock and heavy metal have been unfair. These days, they're unfairly maligned as being they're not commercial, meaning that radio doesn't play rock and metal. We know that. Hardly ever play metal, but they don't play rock these days. And
Not very
mainstream
much,
media. Yeah, the main point too here is that mainstream media ignores rock and metal. And that's really interesting because when I dived into the all-time sales charts, rock and metal, so I'm going to bundle them both together, have a dedicated and loyal fan base, which is why 7 out of the top 10 biggest selling albums of all time have elements of either. And we're talking about albums that have sold plus 40 million, okay? And 16 out of 24 albums that have sold between 30 and 39 million copies, they're in the same market. So simply what I'm saying is people love rock and metal, okay, even having a passing interest in them. And so I can understand why there's an incentive for the band playing in their garage to think, hey, maybe we can attract a bigger audience because it's been done before.
I know, but you know what? I also feel like the commercialization happens only not in numbers, but it happens in control. For example, I remember Warbringer talking about this idea that would go to concerts and they would see their fellow bandmates, beginning bands, being told by their studio how many times they have to headbang, how many times they have to do this, that, blah, 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 and all this other bullshit. And he was like, it was ridiculous that they would be completely controlled. I remember Lazarus AD released their first album, killer record, killer thrash record. You listen to the second record, it's like, what the fuck is this? And it was like pure commercial music. And it doesn't have to, sell millions of records. You can tell when there's influence on a band. At least personally, I think there's sometimes you can feel the influence. It could be maybe a conscious choice from a band, like, hey, maybe we'll get more eyes doing this kind of style, which is how I felt about Ginger. It's like, hey, people tend to like this thing we're doing here. Let's step away from metalcore and go here. And then there's other bands who just unrelentingly, hey, I want to do this. Whether you like it or not, I could give two shits.
I'm thinking, to your point there about bands that change their direction in a way that puts fans off. There is one band who started out as a death doom outfit, and I love them, by the way. And within about 4 releases, so I think by their third album, they completely changed into this almost Pink Floyd style band, and that's the British outfit Anathema. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I've heard of them. I've listened to maybe like some albums back in the day.
Yeah, look, their EPs were Death Doom, and as is their debut, yet they went through this complete stylistic change on the 1996 album Eternity. Now, that is a stunningly beautiful album, devoid of most of what you would describe as metal or even rock. But it's an album that, in my opinion, all metal fans should own because it feels like a metal album. Does that make sense?
It does. I would group quite a few bands of that era: Green Carnation, Opeth, Theater of Tragedy, Sentence. Like all these bands that were coming out around that same time, they were having that doom kind of more melodic, more mellow movement. I don't know if you ever heard Green Carnation, Day of Day, Light of Day, Day of Darkness, 1 hour length an album. It was just saxophones and singing, melodies. It was barely metal music in the album, but 100% can be called metal just in its attitude, lyrical content, and kind of essence. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from with that.
Then there was one of the bigger ones back in the day, and at the time I didn't understand it. To this day, I don't understand why it copped so much hate, but one of the greatest heavy metal albums ever recorded, Swan Song by Carcass.
I like that album. I think it's a great album.
Brilliant. But at the time, it was called a piece of shit. And remember that they started out as a gore grind band, and then they became the death metal version of Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, they frankly influenced the entire Gothenburg sound. And I've spoken to the guys in the group about my opinions on that. And like even At the Gates, I think have taken some of the cues. I mean, it's great. At the Gates, unfuckable. Okay. Let me be clear about this. I'm not saying that they borrowed or they did anything, but you can still be inspired by a group. Okay. And I think that the elements of At the Gates were inspired by by Carcass. But I mean, that was an album that I think was it Al Dawson, the United States representative for Earache, was saying that when they released it, they very quickly they started getting truckloads or mail loads of the album sent back to the head office, and so they had a storeroom full of this album. And he thought, God, what are we going to do with this? But but very quickly, and I think it happened fairly quickly, it started to sell. It just sometimes some things are just slow burners, so they take a long time to sort of catch on. But Napalm Death had diatribes around about the same time as well, where they were talking about how much they were listening to bands like Smashing Pumpkins, and Sonic Youth was the big influence, I think, on that album there. But it's a brutal bastard of an album still. It's just got some not so grind and crustcore elements on it.
You know what I would say? There's still like a part of me that hasn't let go when I listen to certain music. I said this on one of the reactions because I've listened to Children of Bodom a lot, and I've never liked them. And I think I borderline said that they're commercial crap. I think that's kind of how I said it. I tried to be soft and I couldn't. And it's because everything about them felt forced, felt just to be cool. It just felt fake. There's another thing, this element that I couldn't shake. And, of course, there's hardcore fans that feel absolutely the opposite, would think Alex was just an absolutely phenomenal guitarist, and they liked the approach of the band. But to me, it softened whatever kind of was before. It didn't sound good. It wasn't in the case of like Death, when they created a individual thought pattern, and what was it, the second album after that, Symbolic. Yeah. When they released those albums, I remember Mayhem, the lead singer, he was going like, I hate Chuck Schuldiner. He ruined death metal because he made it about it.
Mayhem from the Mayhem lead singer, God, who was it back then? Yeah, that's interesting. I was a Death fan back then as well, and I remember just looking so forward to listening to the progression that Chuck would take that group in. And see, I think Symbolic's their best album, I've got to say. I agree. Crystal Mountain, holy shit! I mean, there was some all-time. Accessible death metal, isn't it? I mean, it's hardly commercial, but it's accessible death metal. Accessible. I tend to be. I think you're like me, mate. We're metal evangelists. We want the genre to grow. We like I said last episode, I consider people like you and I, because of our role in broadcasting, stewards of the genre. We want to foster the genre. We want more people to come in, and we want more people to sort of reach out to us and go, hey, which bands do you like? And we want to take them on that journey as well, because it's very important to us. It's an important part of our psyche. But I think, and I think we are going to help people do it in the right way, if that makes sense. Look, I've had conversations with members of bands like Five Finger Death Punch. There's a few of those other bands out there like that. I just don't. I think they play a role. I just don't know how important their role is in being a gateway for impressionable and younger and green metal and rock fans to be getting into the stuff that we like. And I don't even know whether it's that important with those bands either, to be honest with you. I sort of think there's a couple of other bands out there like Five Finger Death Punch, none of which I can remember, of course, at this moment in time.
And the hardcore bands.
Well, maybe not. See, Hatebreed and stuff, I think they've got an important role to play too. Or I certainly think Hatebreed had an important role to play at the turn of the millennium and after, in the early 2000s. But Five Finger Death Punch, I can't listen to it for longer than about 3 minutes.
I'm about the same way. I actually feel like that about Linkin Park. I feel like that about Slipknot, all these kinds of bands, not because they're new, they're not to my liking. But I started as an adult realizing one thing, and I think people take it very differently in the comments. They think it's just, I think it sucks or it's not worthy. I think almost every band has a place within the spectrum of heavy metal, rock. I don't care what genre, really, to be honest. They all have their place and their purpose. And it's okay for me. Like, I have bands, I know it's commercial, or I know it's a more mid-tier band. I know in my head, I like them. I don't need an explanation. Then there's a band like Bolt Thrower that will absolutely blow my face away, and that's my favorite death metal band of all time. So it's like I just have this list in my head, and we all have a different list. For example, I'll give you an example. I listened to Leviathan Project, didn't like it. So it's like that's the idea of it, is that we make our own lists, we make our own things that we think are the best or how we like it. But they all have a place. Linkin Park brought more people to the rock Maybe even brought some people from hip hop and techno into the rap genre, into the rock genre and metal genre, and got to kind of was the gateway. Black Album was a gateway to so many fans for heavy metal. And then I remember
Yeah.
myself being Black Album the first thing I've heard, and then slowly Sepultura, Slayer. Next thing you know, I'm listening to Nile. Next thing you know, I'm listening to Immortal. And then it's like the most extreme music doesn't even shake me anymore.
Yeah, a couple of good points you raised in there. I never understood the way the musicians, or maybe it was just a singer in Fred Durst and some of these other guys, you know, Chester Bennington and stuff. The average hip hop fan could give less of a shit about rock and metal. Okay, they simply, my experience has been there is zero crossover from someone who self-identifies as an urban music fan, if that's the right term these days. Okay, you get rock fans that will cross over into hip hop and so-called urban music through Linkin Park and Korn and Limp Bizkit. That will happen. Someone out there in the comments section tell me that you were originally an urban music fan and you listened to Limp Bizkit and went, wow, I need to listen to Pantera now. Doesn't happen.
I'll disagree with you on that point.
Is that right? Yeah, well, maybe it's me being, but it might be a geographical thing. In Australia, it doesn't happen, I should say. Yeah, it annoyed me, the fact that rock and metal was always the one that sort of had to bend into these other genres rather than the other genres sort of coming over. It was presented that way. Anyway, whatever happens in the studio happens in the studio, but it always sort of was presented that way. It was like, rock fans need to be more open-minded and listen to this music. Bullshit. Most urban music, as far as I'm concerned, is absolute garbage.
So I'll make my counter argument here. My counter argument is the closest genre to rock and heavy metal is rap in my eyes. It is underground music in its formation. It is music with message. It's a music with an attitude, and basically a metal attitude. Look at NWA. Look at all these kind of beginning by Ice-T. They had this aggression about them that was very easily transferable in my mind, especially a person growing up in New York, very easily transferable from one to the other. It wasn't cool back in the 90s and even 2000s to crossover, I think. And once bands like System of the Down start coming out that were easier for people to get into and understand, I can name you tens of people that are my friends who love System of the Down, who love Metallica albums, will wear a Metallica t-shirt, you know, and they might not be hardcore fans like we are, but they like it. And I think that's the one genre there's a lot of crossover with. Trick Daddy had Ozzy Osbourne's sample on one of his albums. Lil Jon had Slayer Raining Blood as one of his sample for one of his songs. There's a lot of crossover. It's just one of those things. If what I have seen fans, we stay in our camps and we don't know about it. But I tend to, the only genre I don't like, I'm not a big fan of like all American country music. I like country rock, like Creedence and stuff like that, or Boston, but I was never into country. And I'm not a big fan of house music. I like all of it. I like industrial and the crossovers of industrial we had with like Meshuggah and all these other kind of bands that have created that sound as well, and Ministry. So it's like, I think the blend will happen whether we like it or not, because there are kids who are growing up with both of these genres and they love both of them, especially in big urban towns. I don't know how it is in Australia. Here, I see a lot of crossover, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I think my sentiments could be an artifact of when I was growing up and what I observed then. I mean, look, I'm 43 years of age. So, I mean, apart from doing this sort of stuff, I really bump into rock and metal fans, even urban music fans. My wife grew up listening to Boyz II Men and all of that sort of stuff, Beyonce and all that sort of shit. I think the first time she ever heard metal was one of the first times she came over to my place, and I put on Obituary, and she thought I was joking. She thought I was punking her.
Nice way to introduce her to heavy metal.
Well, I think it was just when we met when YouTube just started, and all of a sudden you could watch all of these videos that I used to borrow cassette, VHS tapes of people from, and in Australia you just couldn't really get that sort of stuff easily. You'd randomly go into a record store and see that and go, well, I need to get that. So when YouTube came in, it just opened up this whole world of all of these great videos that most of which I'd never seen before, like Lack of Comprehension from Death. Love the song, but never seen the video. And we used to put it on. And so she'd have Omari on, and I'd put on Death. And then she'd put on insert urban artist here, Naz or whoever it might be. And then I'd put on Obituary or Cannibal Corpse or whoever it might be. We had this very weird blend in our little unit in the valley back then. But Yeah, as I say, look, I think maybe my sentiments are an artifact of when I was growing up, but it used to annoy the hell out of me that I felt like our rock and metal was cheapened at the expense of urban music. But I know what you're saying too about some of the younger fans. They don't see that distinction that I've pointed out.
Yeah.
And I do have people contact me over Facebook through the podcast. They listen to the podcast and they've heard me say I don't like hip hop, because I don't. It's never a style of music I'm going to listen to or be inspired to be curious about, because a bunch of people said, listen to this guy, listen to that guy. I last about 7 or 8 minutes. Then I'm like, I can't do it. It's not for me. But they all are also very knowledgeable about groups like Emperor and Cradle of Filth and Pantera and stuff. But they've got this whole other world, whether it might be actually, there was one hip hop group I listened to for more than 7 or 8 minutes, and they were called Ugly Duckling back in the day. That was it. They were a US group, and I quite liked them. And I think everybody's got a soft spot for Cypress Hill. I've even played them on my radio show. They're a bit different though, Cypress Hill. They've done legit collabs with metal artists, Fear Factory and stuff.
Well, I like that Bring the Noise, Anthrax, and oh my God,
Public Enemy.
Public Enemy. That was a great crossover. I also like bands like Rise of the North Star and Body Count, which is hip hop metal and done well, not like Limp Bizkit kind of limped. It was really done well. I don't know if you ever heard of Rise of the North Star. It's a French band that incorporates Japanese culture and anime along with hip hop and rap and hardcore kind of metal. I love their just energy. They bring a really good energy. Body Count is Ice-T's metal band, and that's rapping with metal. The thing that took me the longest when it comes to rap and good rap music is the psychology is very different. It's not instrument based; it's lyric based, and a lot of times it's the complexity of the lyrics, whether it be double entendres, triple entendres, the meanings and the associations they create is not as important in heavy metal. Heavy metal and rock is more direct. Like, for example, my favorite vocalist and probably lyrics is Max Cavalera. And the way he's just so direct with his lyrics, there's no mistaking what he's talking about. With hip hop, there's a lot of almost like a book, leaves to the imagination what they kind of meant.
Yeah. Body Count, I absolutely adore. By the way, I've had a conversation with Ernie C. He was one of my very early inspirations on the guitar. That first album had an enormous impact on me. But here's the thing: I looked at it. I think I had Seasons in the Abyss and that album. I mean, I play them back to back all the time. So Slayer, for those who aren't aware, and the Body Count album. And look, that first Body Count album, even the second one, Born Dead, I saw Body Count back in 1995. To me, they're just a metal band. Like I have not listened to any of Ice-T's his rap, his hip hop stuff, but he is a metal frontman. I've seen some videos, okay, of him doing his rap thing, but he is the consummate heavy metal frontman.
I agree.
He is fantastic, and I never looked at them when I was listening when I was listening to Body Count. I never once thought for a moment it was a grift. I was just like, man, this shit is on point. This is killer heavy metal.
I would say I would recommend for you to check out their newer albums because they're just as good, if not better. And then to kind of bring it back to the whole commercialization of it is I think the point I want to make and kind of the way I'll kind of, so all the guys here understand where I'm coming from is this. I've been constantly misunderstood that I'm saying commercialization is bad. I believe commercialization is good. It's good in even places where I don't like it, like with Children of Bodom or Cradle of Filth or Linkin Park, because they all have their place. Whether it be an introduction for one person, whether it be just the sound that somebody likes, or it's easy on the ears. And the hardcore bands are there to exist for the same very reason. You want to go deeper, you want to go darker, you want to go more extreme. Those places are there for you as well. We're also creatures of different moods. We want different things. There are times where I want something softer, something that's easier on the ears, and something that's not hard to listen to. And sometimes I want to listen to Nile and have my ears destroyed. So I think they all have a place. And I think it's time to take away that stigma of commercialization. Even Motley Crue songs. I like Dr. Feelgood. I like that song. It's a great song. I like Kiss with their glam rock and their fucking ridiculous outfits. So that's kind of my point when I come through is that they all have a place. It's all kumbaya for me. Even the bands that I don't particularly like, so what? Throw them to the side and go to the next one.
Yeah, it's just up to the user to choose what the listener to choose what music they want to listen to. Fans who get in a bother and get butthurt over bands releasing different types of music. Like I'll never forget when Morbid Angel released Elude Divinum Insanus. And I've spoken to so many of the members of Morbid Angel, including David about it, David Vincent about it. I'd love to speak to Trey about it. I've spoken to Trey's mother about it. She told me how upset he was about the fan response. And I think it really hurt him, you know. And fans, I spoke to, you've mentioned Niall a few times. When I spoke to Carl, I brought it up and I said, look, you were on record prior to the album being released. You were asked by their label, it was Season of Mist or whoever it was. I think it was Season of Mist. You were one of the people that they hand-picked to actually pitch to the audience that this is a different album, but stick with it. It's got its gems. And he told me, his words were, what the fuck? The amount of hate mail he received and go fuck yourself comments. This is Carl from Nile.
Well, what album was that? Annihilation the Wicked or?
No, Illud Divinum Insanus from Morbid Angel.
Oh, so they wanted him to come out and kind of in defense of Morbid Angel.
Well, they're on the front foot. They knew it was a divisive album, so they picked people. There was a few other people, but probably the most notable one was Carl from Nile. They picked him to release. They put together a press release, and they had some quotes from notable people. Carl was one of them, and he got on the front foot and said, "Look, it's a different album, but stick with it. At the end of the day, Morbid Angel are known for their innovation." And this is a good example of it. Words to the effect, anybody can go and find the quotes online these days. There's no need for me to dig it up for people. They can go and find it if they're curious. But I spoke to him about it because he and Morbid Angel are like that. You know, I mean, they're good mates. And Trey and the guys in Morbid Angel are good mates. And he told me the amount of hate mail that he copped, and he just couldn't believe that metal fans would react so childishly.
Yeah, I agree with
now, this is a band, Morbid Angel can basically release a hip hop album if they want at this point, and their legacy is intact, in my opinion. Okay. I'm an old fan though. I mean, I remember Covenant when it came out. I remember the impact that it had. A death metal album charting, which it did, it cracked the Billboard Top 200. It was unheard of at the time. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about an album with overtly satanic themes, up there with Mariah Carey, for God's sakes. But it did it in an era where you had to actually go and buy albums, and these other bands had these huge marketing machines. You know, you'd go walk into a mall or a shopping center, as you call them in Australia, and you'd see big pictures of Mariah and God knows Celine Dion and all the other stuff. And Morbid Angel, the satanic band from Florida that could, was up there with it for a period of time. Anyway, I'm just saying, for a little slither of time, it was up there.
Yeah, it showed everybody what's possible.
Yeah, and with an uncompromisingly brutal sound, you know. But fans, I think, need to check themselves with the artists, because artists have creative license to do whatever they choose to do. Same thing with Cold Lake by Celtic Frost, an album that I loved for many, many years. You still see like 20-year-old, with all due respect to any of our listeners who are 20 years of age, but 20-year-old fans saying Cold Lake's a dog of an album, blah, blah, blah. It's like, look, the only context you've got is what you've read online, other fans and stuff talking about it. Park all of that stuff. Some of these albums actually do have, you might not, fair enough if you don't like them. I'm not saying everybody has to like them. I'm far from saying that. I'm simply saying develop your own opinion about things. Don't go with the herd. That includes these metal fans who think that they're vanguards of the vanguards of the broader opinion that other metal fans should have.
I think that's the beautiful thing that I do with the reactions. I find it to be interesting myself, is that it's my job to say exactly what's on my mind as raw as possible in the moment. And I've listened to the new Hypocrisy album, the whole album, and reacted to it song by song. And you can see me go from really liking it to like, this is okay. And people were like, "Oh, how could you say this?" I'm like, dude, this is how I felt. I told them by the end of the album, like, I don't think this is the best Hypocrisy album. I'd even heard other albums, because if they have such a legendary name and this is their best album, I've heard this 10 times. This is a good record for a fan who's been waiting for another Hypocrisy album, and they want some little bit more like me with Exodus of a Persona Non Grata or the Slayer Repentless album. I know Repentless is not a great record from Slayer, but I like it because I'm a hardcore fan. There's a couple of songs I can pick out. It's a fun record. I mean, it's not going to go in the legacy of Slayer. So that's kind of how I felt about this idea of being able to voice your opinion. And we should have a moment where we sit down and be like, okay, I don't agree with you, but you have your own opinion. We're still friends, make peace, go listen, go metal, go mosh, do whatever we need to do.
Yeah. Metal is a broad church, brother. And we all have our own unique take and perspective on the music that moves us. And I don't know, for me, metal and rock music have been such an intrinsic part of my life. There are whole episodes of my life way outside of music that I can associate with the music I was listening to at the time. Okay. And they bring back such beautiful memories a lot of the time. And these aren't radio songs, or songs that were a part of the public domain, like that bloody awful Titanic song from Celine Dion back in the day that, I can't remember the name of it now. I'm trying to get it out of my head, but, I might like Frozen in Time by Obituary. Reminds me of, when it came out, I got it and listened to it on my iPod. Remember when iPods were a thing back in the day? And I used to listen to it on the train into work. And it just, whenever I listen to it now, it just brings back great memories. This is a brutal metal album by Obituary, but it brings back all these really comforting and warm memories for me. And that sort of thing that it's such a subjective thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
What we're talking about here, because one man's accessible music is another man's satanic death metal or Floridian death metal in Obituary's case. And I just think, especially these days, there's so much music available to people. And I've said it about people listening to my channel, and no doubt you feel the same way about what you're doing there. If you don't like it, just change your channel. Just switch on to something else. There's so much out there for people to dive into at this point in time. There just isn't the need to be negative about what we're doing, being the rock and metal side of things. There just isn't the need to be, banging on about In Flames' change in sound in 2004 on Soundtrack to Your Escape from the Gothenburg sound that they had to the more Deftone, or it's not Deftones, but I don't know what you'd call it
Poppy.
these days, more rock, poppy rock sound that they've got these days. And I've even spoken to the guys in the group about it all, and the singer whose name escapes me right now, he sort of bristled at the comment and said, no, we're just doing our own thing. And it's like, well, you're doing your own thing, but it did attract a bigger audience. So more power to you. I'm just simply saying that as an old fan, I don't listen to this newer stuff and I love your older stuff. Typical long-time fan statement to say. But
I think we're always going to have, I think I mentioned to you, right? I said I like newer creator, the more accessible creator.
Yeah.
Don't like you said, it's a preference thing, and it's okay to have those opinions.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Yeah. It's, as I say, it's a divisive topic. I want to see what people have got to say in the comments about this one here. This is our third or fourth episode or thereabouts, and
Third.
Our third episode, and I think we want to be inspired by people to sort of for them to give us their hot takes on things without actually attacking us, please. The other thing, what do you think? What do you and the audience think about what we've spoken about, and what I'm actually really interested to hear, is for people watching and listening, what is your perspective on what commercial or accessible means? And give us examples. Give us examples.
100%. And you know what it is? The reason we're doing this here, the reason both of us are doing our channels, all of this, is to create conversations and create a space for metal, rock guys to come together and talk about music and disagree and agree and compare and say how you're crazy. All these conversations, a place for them so we can exchange and have these conversations. And I think it's a beautiful thing when somebody comes out and proves me wrong. When I would say something about a particular band and they'll tell me, you have to check the song out, you'll see how wrong you are. And that was me with Gojira this week. Never heard Gojira, so I heard one or two songs, didn't like what I heard. Somebody said, you got to check out The Gift of Guilt. Hear the song, my face is blown. I'm like, I have to listen to this whole band now. So it's like, it's a beautiful moment when you're completely switched over onto the other side just by conversation and disagreements.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Gojira. That they're a band that took me a while to get into them as well, actually. I can't even say I listen to them that regularly, but if they're on, I'll leave it on. I can tell you that now.
Awesome. So guys, again, leave us in the comments. Let us know what you thought about commercialization, right? The topics, your opinions, your examples. And tune in next time for our next episode, which will have an interesting topic as well. And if you have an interesting topic for us that you would like us to talk about, let us know down below in the comments. Andrew, my friend, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely, mate. Always. Really enjoyed this one.
And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, man.
Thank you, brother. You too. Have a good afternoon and a great evening.